Good afternoon. So today I want to tell you what to expect when debating atheists on the Bible and the subject of astrotheology. So I had some very interesting conversations with some atheists in a Facebook group, and I was arguing with them, and I was actually very much surprised at the, quite frankly, low level of argumentation. I expected it to be better than what I would get from a Muslim discussion or from a Christian fundamentalist discussion, but it was actually just as bad or even worse. And I'm going to give you some examples. I'm not necessarily going to go back through all my Facebook arguments, but I'm just going to give you some off the top of my head. So, on this channel, if you've been watching my channel, I've been discussing Noah's Ark a lot and how Noah's Ark follows the old calendar, the old Babylonian calendar. And so, in order to get the discussion going, I would post something like Noah's Ark is the sun. Noah's Ark is the sun going through the old calendar. And the types of responses I was getting, and it wasn't just from a few people, but a lot of people were totally moronic. Let me give you an example. I had one person, not one actually, several. I'm thinking of one. I had one person tell me that Noah's Ark can't be the sun. He said, do you believe? He said, so you're telling me that you believe that the sun is a boat? And this person tells me the sun is not a boat. The sun is not a boat. That's so ridiculous. The sun's billions of years old. How could it be a boat? The boats don't give off heat like the sun. And they weren't being ironic. They thought that I believed. They thought that I believed that the sun was an actual boat with animals on it. I'm not kidding. They weren't joking. They go, because they asked me, they go, you think the sun is a boat with animals on it? That's so dumb. And so the thing is, they think I'm dumb but do you see how dumb that is? Like, let me give an example. This other guy said, a Christian guy, which was similar. He was a Christian, one of these a Christian literalist. So he said, the Noah's Ark is made from gopher wood. It can't be, that can't be, the sun is not made from gopher wood. So his response was similar, almost identical, to the atheist. The atheist told me, you think that the sun is a boat? That is so stupid. How could you think that? In other words, I think the sun is a boat. They said the sun can't be a boat because the ark's made of gopher wood. Neither one can just understand an allegory, a metaphor. How come that is? I'm trying to understand why. It's very strange, but they weren't joking. They didn't seem like they were joking. They were being very serious. And so the argument was, they said, so you're telling me you believe that the sun is a boat with animals on it? It's like, no, dude, that's not what I'm saying. That's not what I'm saying at all. So it was a very idiotic conversation, to be honest with you. It was arguments, discussions with very little intellectual interest. So what were some of the other? That was one part of it. Now another thing that I discovered is that, like, for instance, I've been promoting the Babylonian flood myth and talking about the Babylonian flood myth, and I've frankly been talking about it since the 1990s, when I went into a library and found a book that had a record of all these ancient Semitic stories, right? And so I went through that long time ago. Back in the 1990s, I was looking at that. So I've got people coming onto my Facebook posts, and doing these long copy and paste, because I'm saying Noah's Ark is the flood. Like, the Noah's Ark story in Genesis is about the sun, right? I'm just posting, Noah's Ark is about the sun, and the sun is the sun is a light, and the light floods the earth in spring, summer, and it ends in autumn, and then it recedes in winter, and it's all based on the old calendar, and the old calendar starts in spring, right? our calendar starts in winter, midwinter, right? But the old calendar starts in spring. And so in spring he builds the boat, and then it rises up after 40 days, and that's you're right in. If you do the calculations, the ship rises up for 40 days from the 17th day of the second month, which is our April. And I had someone tell me it wasn't April then, like stupid comments. But so I'm explaining this right. It rises up into spring, and then right into once it reaches up after 40 days, you're right in the beginning of June. So it brings you right into June, right into the month of June, which is the month of the summer solstice. And then of course it ends in the autumn, and where you see the arc coming to a rest is literally like the day before the equinox, the autumn equinox. So you can calculate all those out. The way to calculate it out is you get like there's a website called Moon Giant, which will tell you what the moon phases are. So you got to count from, you look at what the new moon is to the first crescent. So new moon to first crescent is 1 day. So that's day 1 would be the day before the evening when the crescent appears. So from evening to evening. So day 1 would be that morning, where you wake up, and then that evening you'll see the crescent. That's the first day. So you count the days, right? And if you count the days, you'll see that what I'm telling you is correct. And you do it according to the old calendar. So you'd start with the month of April. So you'd want to look at where does the new moon start in April, and then count forward. So because I'm talking about the Babylonian flood myth, that's what brought that up. So I get these guys, and they're the atheists, right? And they're going to prove to everybody that Noah's Ark is really just the Babylonian flood myth, which it's not, you see? It's not just the Babylonian flood myth. It's a different story with a different purpose, because the Babylonian flood myth is about a flood. So I've got these guys copy-pasting like, whole articles from encyclopedias and dictionaries and whatever about the Babylonian flood myth. It's like, we're not talking about the Babylonian flood myth, though. We're talking about this. They're like, but this proves it wasn't, Noah's Ark. But I'm not trying, it doesn't matter if that's a different thing. We're talking about this thing, right? See, in the Babylonian flood myth, it's about a flood. It's about a flood of water, okay? In Noah's Ark, it's not about a flood of water. It's about the sun. That's the whole point. So I'm trying to explain this to people, and they're not getting it. So I did manage to get them to understand what I was talking about by asking them certain questions. Like, the atheists would come along and say, it's the Babylonian flood. They stole it all. And I would say, okay, so why does the ark, why does the flood begin in April? Why does it begin in the second month of the year? And of course, what is the response I get? What difference does it make? What difference does it make what month it starts in? Why would that matter? That's because that explains the story. Remember, I did a lecture on this several weeks ago on this very thing. What difference does it make? That's the answer that I had when I first read the story of Noah's Ark, and I'm reading the dates of when things happen. I said to myself while I'm reading, that's not important. I'm trying to read the story. I want to know what it's about. And then I come to this date. On the 17th day of the second month, this happened. And I'm like, well, that's irrelevant, right? And so people just blew right past that. And that's why no one ever knew what the story was about after over 2,000 years. I was the first person to find out what the story is. Yes, I'm bragging because I know how to read. Good for me. But I'm just saying, for 2,000 years, no one's known what the story is about. Now, part of the reason is because they changed the calendar. And so how would you, now it's just irrelevant. So I'm talking to this atheist guy. He says, it's the Babylonian flood myth. And I tell him, why does the flood start on the 17th day of the second month? And he says, what difference does it make? Which is the same argument I had, which is the same thing that everyone says when they read that book. What difference does it make? It makes all the difference in the world because it explains the story. And unless you pay attention to those dates and times, you're not going to understand what it's about. You're going to think it's about a boat. You're going to think it's about water. And none of the story makes sense. And you've got these atheists going around, how can you have a boat and all these animals on it? That's just so stupid. It's like, well, dude, it's about the calendar. It's a story about the calendar. So, they just they either, part of the problem is when you're arguing with people, they're so sure that they're correct about something because they've been traumatized into believing something. Like with atheism, a lot of them grew up, or some of them grew up in Christian families where the form of Christianity was so weird and so illogical and nonsensical that they just hate it, right? They just can't stand it, and they don't want to hear anything good about the Bible or what it really means because they've already decided that whole thing is complete garbage, right? Because the way it was taught to them. It wasn't taught to them as an allegory. It was taught to them as, this is the literal truth, and this is a history book, and all this happened exactly the way it says in this book, right? Which misses the whole point, right? If you think Noah's Ark is about a flood, you haven't read the story. And when you read the dates and times, and it says that the ark rises in April, and it peaks in summer, and it recedes through winter, unless you're following those times, you haven't read the story. You don't know what it's about. So the dates and times mean everything. But what everyone does, it's literally the same word for word. What everyone says to themselves when they read the dates and times in Noah's Ark is, what difference does it make? What difference does it make? It literally explains the story. So that was interesting, because I didn't have just one atheist hit me with the Babylonian flood myth. I had many. Now, guess who's been promoting that since the 1990s? Me. I've been using that to discredit. I started using the Babylonian flood myth to discredit Noah's Ark, the story of Noah's Ark, not knowing that it was a story about the sun. So I said, your story in Noah's Ark, that can't be true, because the Christians will tell you, the fundamentalist Christians who believe the Bible literally, will tell you that this is exactly how it happened. It literally happened this way, right? and so then I would take the Babylonian flood myth and I would say, no, it didn't, because look, there's this Babylonian flood myth, and this is actually the original, which it is. The original comes from the Babylonian flood myth of Ziusudra, which was also Nehushtan, which is also other names and versions. But ultimately, it goes back to a stone inscription about a flood occurring on what's called the Sumerian Kings List. So there's a list of all the kings, and then it says there's a flood. Now, did a flood happen? Maybe. According to the history, a flood happened. That's all I know about it. But that doesn't have anything to do with the Noah's Ark flood. Now, here's the other interesting thing about Christianity, right? So once I broke them down on the sun thing once I broke down the atheists, once I broke them down by just dragging them through the mud and forcing them to see the allegory that Noah's Ark is the sun, and just beating them over the head with it until they had literally given up, and basically had to admit that I was not openly admit, but just got angry and basically realized what I was saying. Because it took a long time for them to even realize the arguments that I was making, because they're when you argue with them, they're arguing with other people in the past. They're not really arguing with you. They're arguing with their mother. They're arguing with their father. They're arguing with a priest that they saw on television. They're not arguing with you, right? Or a pastor they saw on television, a preacher. They're not arguing with you in real time. But there's a lot of Christians making those same stupid arguments against them. So they're used to that. They're used to these regular arguments that they're hearing about how it's all literal. And so the Christians using those arguments against the atheists also aren't really understanding the story, and therefore they're not really fully getting the benefits of the allegory. So once I broke them down, then I just went crazy with, imagery, because that's another thing that the atheists do. Jesus wasn't white. This is all from Egypt, and this is Horus and Isis and Osiris, and it's like, okay, so let's just get, so I started posting images of Mary with, a white Mary with radiant gold behind her, and a white blonde Jesus, and it's like, and I would post, Mary is the mother of God. The Muslims hate that. The atheists can't stand it either, and but the Muslims really hate it, and the atheists don't like it. But see, so So they'll say, "Oh, that's from Egypt. You stole that from Egypt." Okay, so you're saying then that Christianity predates Jews, and it goes back to Egypt, who were the people that built these giant pyramids and had all this technology to literally take these giant stones and make them into massive pyramids. And you're saying that's where my religion comes from. Okay. Okay. So you're saying that my belief system comes from the most advanced civilization to ever exist on the planet Earth, called Egypt? Okay. I agree with you. Christianity is ancient. That's what I'm saying. It's ancient. Now, of course, in Egypt, they also had a lot of gods, right? And of course, but what I'm saying is that the priesthood or the priest class or somebody in Egypt at some time, at some point, knew that these were allegories. The people that wrote them knew that were allegories. This is another argument that an atheist told me, is these people didn't write allegories. They were stupid. They were simple. They thought the sun really was a boat. No, they didn't. They did not. No, you're simple. You're the one that doesn't understand. The people that wrote these allegories, whether it's in Egypt or in Greece or in Chaldea, with the Anunnaki are not aliens. The Anunnaki are natural forces in nature. It's a story about the natural forces of nature and the hierarchy of the natural forces in nature. That's why there's a hierarchy above of the gods. Or it's about in Egypt how the gods created. In other words, how the universe is created. The universe in Egypt are the gods, right? So the gods are defined as forces in nature. So it's literally a whole science of the universe and how the universe. Now it wasn't necessarily exactly correct because some of those books were written at a primitive time, but it was their observations at the time. They thought that that everything came out of water. They thought that beyond the sky was water, up where the stars are. So it wasn't totally correct, but it was based on observation. So they're observing and they're writing stories about their observations, and this is built into a science or an understanding of the natural order of things. So it is rooted in nature and the natural order, and it is based on observation, which is science. So, but in science, you update your theories as you get more information. But that doesn't mean they weren't being scientific in their observations. Now, that what they did was they mythologized these natural forces into gods and made stories about them, and these would be allegories which would teach various things. But I mean, why is this? None of this is all this is over the heads of the atheists. I may even be talking too fast. I hope that you're understanding what I'm saying. So yes, Christianity, then we could say, doesn't come from rabbis. It doesn't come from Jews. It comes from Egypt. And guess who else came from Egypt? Israel. Israel came from Egypt. Israel came from Egypt. Christianity came from Egypt. Now, a lot of the philosophy of the Athenians, which is the Pythagorean line, which is the great philosophers who actually abandoned the pagan gods in favor of wisdom and knowledge and truth. See, that was the religion of Pythagoras. That was the religion of Heraclitus and Plato and Socrates and all and Aristotle and Anaxagoras. They were seeking wisdom and truth, which they called the logos, the wisdom, the logos, reason. Reason comes from God. The mind of God is reason. The mind of God is truth. That's the story of the logos. That's the story of Jesus Christ being murdered at Golgotha, the skull, which is another interesting image that I posted once I broke down the atheists, it was fun to hit them with all these iconic Christian images. You've got Jesus Christ, and above his head it says, INRI or whatever, the king of Judah. Here, this is the king of Judah, and he's out on the cross, and at his feet is what? A skull, right? In the Orthodox Christian iconography, at the base of the cross is the skull of Adam. The skull of Adam. The skull of Adam. That's the skull. He's and they came up with all these legends about that was the burial cemetery where Adam and Eve were buried. Well, that's all not true. But the skull of Adam represents Golgotha, the skull where Jesus Christ goes to die at your skull, because he's the light, he's the truth, he's the logos, he's reason. It's the mind of God is put to death at the skull. You see, the mind of God is put to death by the rabbis in the story of Jesus Christ versus the rabbis. They put him to death. So he's the Torah, he's the Word, he's the Logos, he's the wisdom. You're worshiping what purely. If you practice Christianity purely, without all the preachers and the priests and everybody else getting in your way, what you're actually worshiping is truth and wisdom and reason. The very thing that the American founding fathers worshipped, but not knowing that this was what the story of Jesus was about. The founding fathers were smart, but they didn't realize, the founding fathers of America that created America, they didn't realize that the story of Jesus is about reason. See, they didn't know that. They didn't know that. They hated Christianity. Voltaire hated Christianity, and Jefferson hated Christianity, and Thomas Paine hated Christianity, and a lot of them hated Christianity, and they were to a large extent humanists, right? They believed in the humanism. They believed in the 666, the number of the beast. The beast is man. Man is the beast, right? Your man is the animal. The animal is the beast. So there's no that 666 is the number of the man. So it's the empire of man. It's the empire of the beast, right? And so that's basically what they created, thinking that they were doing this in the age of enlightenment and reason, not realizing, because they were confused about the story of Jesus. They were confused about the story of Jesus. They were confused about the whole Bible. They didn't know Noah's Ark was the sun going through the old calendar. The old calendar was gone. The Romans changed the calendar, right? So now the calendar starts in winter. Now the story doesn't even follow the calendar. Right. Nobody knew this. Nobody knew this for over 2,000 years. Nobody knew that Noah's Ark was the sun. When you know Noah's Ark is the sun, the rest of the book makes sense. The Ark of Moses and Joshua and Aaron. It's really Moses and Aaron. And there's something to that companionship, which I haven't really figured out. I believe it relates to the constellations. But I haven't looked into it enough. I'm going to have to go back and read through the Bible and see if there's any constellation equivalents to Moses and Aaron. Kind of reminds me of the story, not that it's similar, but how there's a companionship between Gilgamesh and Enkidu, which places them as Orion and Canis Major. But I'm not sure if that's the case with Moses and Aaron. I really can't say that is the case. I'd have to look at it. And then, of course, you have Joshua, and he raises his arm, which is a little similar to Orion. And Orion does mean Aryan. Orion is Aryan. That's the same word. It's just a different pronunciation. So I'm not sure exactly on that end of it as far as an astrotheological take. But we're not talking about that. We're talking about the sun. We're talking about how, if you understand that Noah's Ark is the sun going through the calendar, the rest of the Bible makes perfect sense. And the Muslims got it wrong, and the Freemasons got it wrong, and the Catholic, both Roman and Eastern and Roman, got it right to a large extent, because it was derived from Egypt, which is the true source of this information, with all of its extraneous and other, the logos theory coming in and becoming part of it. So there was definitely a synthesis going on. But Egypt is like one of the key origin points of this religion, the Bible. Another point I'll make: Zoroaster. I'm skipping around here, but Zoroaster. So Zoroaster is Abraham. But But they did not have the Zoroaster theory or the Zoroastrian religion until after the captivity of the Israelites and the Jews. So I believe that they got the Zoroaster philosophy after encountering the Israelites. So I don't think that that was original to the Persians. Pretty sure it wasn't, because it doesn't exist anywhere in the old books. The old books are all about the Anunnaki gods, and that continued on straight through the Assyrian. It just continued on generation after generation. So there was no ancient story about there is no ancient story about Zoroaster. Zoroaster's story didn't come along until the Persians conquered the Middle East over in the West Asian area and got control of the Judeans, and then now all of a sudden this new philosophy appears in Persia about Zoroaster. So that's so I don't believe that it came from the northeast and went west and brought Christianity or Judaism or anything like that to that territory. What is the origin of the Abraham story? I don't really know, but I don't really know, but I don't really think it's actually that significant. I think it's more likely that all of this came out of Egypt, and then they back-wrote the story of Noah and all of his descendants and Abraham. Abraham may have been some kind of legendary figure amongst the Aramaic people, but it has nothing to do with Zoroaster. The Zoroaster idea came after the Persians took Western Asia. So it went from west to east, not east to west, is what I'm saying. What else can I say about this? The last thing I'll say, so there's a few key passages in the Bible which you have to understand in order to understand what Jesus Christ is and isn't, what the Noah's Ark is and isn't. But so Muslims like to argue this point about Jesus is not God, he's a man, he was a prophet in Islam. That's all totally wrong, totally fake. The key verses in the Bible which will tell you exactly what Jesus is are Genesis 1:3, which says, "And God said, let there be light, and there was light." That's Jesus. Jesus is the light in Genesis 1:3. God's word is light. That's Jesus Christ. Jesus means God is my salvation. You're saved by the word. You're saved by the light, which is the truth, which is reason, which is God's truth. See, it comes from God. This is before all the laws of Moses and all this other garbage that you get later in the Bible, and kill the Amalekites and kill these people and all this other nonsense, right? Just the pure truth from creation. That's what Jesus Christ is in the Bible. He's not a man. He's not anything else. He represents the light, the truth, the word spoken at creation. So then you've got Genesis 1:3. The other place you will find this very specifically is Proverbs 8:22, which says, and I don't have it in front of me, something on the order of, I was the first of your creations. You created me in the beginning. Now it uses the term me. You created me in the beginning. I don't know exactly how it's worded, but you can take a look at it. You created me in the beginning. So wisdom is talking about itself as the first creation of God in Proverbs 8:22. I read a book one time that gave a very poor explanation of that verse, claiming that it had something to do with reincarnation. This is another example of people not understanding what they're reading. Now, I'm not going to go into this on this video, but there is reincarnation in the story of Jesus later on, where people ask him if he's one of the old prophets and this and that, and that John the Baptist is the reincarnation of Elijah. That you can look that up. I'm not going to go into that in this video. But that's not what Proverbs 8:22 is talking about. Proverbs 8:22 is talking about how wisdom is the firstborn of God. The firstborn of God is wisdom, the mind of God, reason, truth. That is the first creation of God. That's what Proverbs 8:22 is talking about. That's what Genesis 1:3 is talking about. That is what John 1:1 through 5 is talking about when it says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And of course, this Word is the truth, and this Word is the light, and the light shineth in darkness, and the darkness comprehended it not. So it separates day from night, like in Genesis, day from night, light and dark. Now this goes back to Egypt. In Egypt, you had the serpent. God represents the chaos of darkness. So all the darkness in the world at night, you look out in the stars and you see the lights shining, but then you see that darkness in the background, and that was actually mythologized as the serpent. That was the serpent. That was the serpent was the chaos, and so in Egypt you had Horus on his sunboat, and he goes through the 12 stages of the underworld, because of course there's 12 hours at night, just like there's 12 hours in the day, right? And so he goes through the 12 hours, he goes through the 12 stages of the underworld, and he has to combat this serpent, the serpent of chaos, of darkness, and then he's victorious in the morning, right? So that's a little bit of the story from Egypt. Of course, it's not the same story, but what it is, so it's not the same. It's not that the story is the same. It's that the concept, which the story is based on, is the same. It's about the light, and the light is the truth, and the truth is the Word of God, and so there's a comparison made between light, physical light and dark, and truth and ignorance. So the enemy of God is ignorance. The enemy of God is stupidity. The enemy of God is irresponsibility. The enemy of God is all of the ignorance in the world that lacks light. It lacks reason. So anywhere where you see in the world an absence of reason, an absence of logic, you're seeing the enemy of God, the enemy of Jesus Christ. And that's the weird thing about it, is when you read the Bible and you say, this story is so irrational, this story is so illogical, this story makes no sense, because you can't read an allegory. That's the problem. It's not that the story doesn't make sense. The story may not make sense. An allegory doesn't need to make sense. The allegory tells a story. And the story is that the Logos is put to death at Golgotha, which is the skull. And so when you know that, you basically know everything. So there you go. Enjoy the rest of your day. Take care.